Anybody want to play for a cheesy? Okay, who brought the dog? Take a moment to recall the actors from your childhood, the ones who truly made you feel something. It was a connection you couldn't quite put into words. I'm not talking about the cool action heroes or the tough guys, but the ones who seemed genuinely human approachable, almost like a familiar face you might have known in real life. That kind of actor is a rare breed, and perhaps even more so today. Rick Moranis was a standout among them, one of the last of his kind. He was warm, he was funny, and he possessed a type of charisma that had nothing to do with conventional looks, bravado, or an imposing physical presence. He was a comedy writer who, against the odds, became a film star, and he carried that writer's sensibility into every single one of his performances. For a time in the 1980s, he seemed to be in everything, and then, just as quickly, he was gone. What truly became of Rick Moranis? Let's delve into the story. Long before Hollywood ever came calling, Moranis was crafting something extraordinary up in Canada. It was called Second City Television, or SCTV, and it was celebrated for its sharp, character-focused, and disciplined comedy. This wasn't just mindless chaos, it was carefully constructed satire, and it became a magnet for some of the most brilliant comedic minds of an entire generation. John Candy, Eugene Levy, Martin Short, and Catherine O'Hara. But the way Moranis found his way there is especially revealing. He was the only regular performer on SCTV who had not come up through the Second City stage company. His background was in radio, and he was brought into the fold by his friend, Dave Thomas. From the very beginning, he was a bit of an outsider, someone who forged his own path into that world, and that speaks volumes about him. He would later say, "I'm really not an actor. I'm a guy who comes out of comedy, and my impetus was always to rewrite the line to make it funnier, not to try to make somebody's precious words work." That is an absolutely vital insight into who he was. He wasn't just performing characters, he was building them from the inside out. That was the source of all that empathy he projected. The nervous, slightly clumsy persona he honed on SCTV was never a mask. It was a finely tuned craft, and it was entirely his creation. His first significant breakthrough in film came with Strange Brew in 1983. Moranis co-wrote, co-directed, and starred in the film alongside Dave Thomas, the same friend who had brought him to SCTV. The film was proof that he was more than a supporting player. He was capable of carrying a movie. His unique presence translated beautifully to the big screen. After that, he made a surprising choice. He took on a darker, more dramatic role in Streets of Fire, playing a character who was a bit slimy and morally questionable. It demonstrated a range that audiences hadn't expected. But it was 1984 that would be the year that changed the trajectory of his entire life. Just consider what Ghostbusters represented at the time. You had Bill Murray, the coolest man on the planet, Dan Aykroyd, one of the most recognizable comedic actors in the world, and Sigourney Weaver, fresh from her success in Alien and on Broadway. This was a movie loaded with established, heavyweight talent. And then you had Rick Moranis, a comedy writer and performer from Canadian television, known for small films and cult hits like Strange Brew. He was hardly anyone's idea of a major Hollywood star. And absolutely nobody, not the studio, not the audience, and probably not even Moranis himself, could have ever imagined just how massive that film was going to become or what it would mean for his career. He portrayed Louis Stully, the neighbor, the accountant, the guy who gets locked out of his own party while all his guests are still having a good time inside. On the page, Louis is written as pure comic relief. He's a motormouth who can't read a room and is awkward in every social setting imaginable. He is designed to be the punchline. But if you watch what Moranis actually does with the character, he never winks at the audience. He never lets on that he's in on the joke. Louis honestly believes that he's charming. He's genuinely convinced that people like him. And because of that sincerity, you find yourself liking him too. That is no easy feat. Playing someone so oblivious without making them seem pathetic demands a special kind of warmth that you either have or you don't. Moranis had it in abundance. John Candy had actually been the first choice for the role of Louis Tully, but creative differences about the character led to Moranis being cast instead, as his instinct was always to play the part with sincerity, rather than as a broad caricature. That single decision altered the course of both of their careers. In a movie filled with bigger, louder, and cooler performances, he discovered a way to be the person you found yourself quietly cheering for, which, when you think about it, is what he did for the rest of his time in film. Following that was Little Shop of Horrors, and this is where you can see his gentle nature most clearly. It's interesting to note that the director, Frank Oz, had never even heard of Moranis when casting started. He had been living in London for 9 years and was simply out of touch with the talent scene. It was producer David Geffen who suggested Moranis for the part. Oz only came on board after seeing his work, and by all accounts, they went on to become very close friends. Spaceballs is worth looking at closely because Dark Helmet was a completely different kind of role. This is a character whose sole purpose is to be ridiculous. The entire joke is huge and self-referential. Mel Brooks constructed the whole film on a foundation of knowing winks and breaking the fourth wall, and Moranis is completely committed to it. The enormous helmet on his small frame, the theatrical villainous posing, the deliberate absurdity of it all, and still, in that context, even while he's playing the gag with a completely straight face, as the audience laughs at the pure physical comedy of this small man in this giant helmet, you still get the sense that this isn't really him. The joke lands so well in part because Dark Helmet feels like the complete opposite of everything Rick Moranis actually was. The character's menace is funny because it's so utterly unconvincing, and he knew it. He played that part to perfection. Parenthood offered an entirely new set of challenges. His character, Nathan, the controlling, uptight, and overly intellectual father, is not a person you are meant to like, and at first, you don't. He is rigid and difficult, the kind of person who makes everyone else feel on edge at family get-togethers. And then, you have the classroom scene. He walks into his wife's classroom while she is teaching and proceeds to serenade her with a Karen Carpenter song in front of everyone. That single act redefines his entire character in about 90 seconds, and it is a direct callback to Little Shop of Horrors. In that film, Seymour sang because he couldn't find any other way to express what he felt, and here, Nathan is doing the very same thing. And after that came Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. This would become what was likely his biggest commercial movie, a huge Disney production that became one of the highest grossing films of 1989, and a true phenomenon for families everywhere. Kids begged their parents to take them, and then parents went back and took the kids to see it again. It could have easily been pure slapstick, just another broad comedy with a performer mugging for the camera. He plays a slightly chaotic, well-intentioned father whose heart is always in the right place, even as the world around him is coming undone. Looking back on the round-in, that performance today, knowing what would later happen in his life, it carries a different weight. By 1989, Rick Moranis had become one of the most recognizable actors in all of Hollywood. And in that moment, the trajectory of his life altered completely. In 1991, he lost his wife, Ann Belsky, a costume designer, to breast cancer. They were parents to 2 small children. It was here that the narrative of his career momentum gave way to the far more urgent story of his life. He was, in fact, slated to appear in City Slickers that very year. But as Ann's condition declined, he withdrew from the project to be by his family's side, and the part was recast. A fundamental shift in his priorities was already underway. In subsequent interviews, he never framed it as a retirement, but rather as a necessary pause. A career in film demanded constant travel and long shoots, keeping him away for months at a time. As a newly single father, that lifestyle was no longer sustainable. His explanation was straightforward. I became a single parent, and I just found that it was too difficult to manage the traveling involved. And so, he stepped away. As the years passed, that pause simply lengthened until he realized, in his own estimation, that he didn't miss the work. He painted a picture of his home life in those years, saying, "When my kids came home, there was music and there were lights on, and there were great smells coming out of the kitchen, and it was just a joyful place to be, and that's what I wanted." His retreat wasn't immediate. He still appeared in Ghostbusters 2, My Blue Heaven, and Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves. In 2003, his warm, gentle, and unmistakable voice was featured in Brother Bear, but his face, his actual physical presence, had quietly vanished from the silver screen. It was a departure people noticed, because unlike many performers who fade away after poor career moves, scandals, or simply reaching the end of their creative path, Moranis left while he was still at his peak. But that doesn't mean he was inactive. In 2003, almost unexpectedly, he began crafting songs, mostly country tunes that were clever, witty, and self-aware. By 2005, this new venture culminated in an album titled The Agoraphobic Cowboy. That title reveals so much. It's not the work of a man who misplaced his sense of humor. It's the work of someone whose humor was perfectly preserved, just channeled into a Clies to Fly, different medium. In an industry where staying in the public eye requires a relentless performance both on and off camera, he simply chose not to play that game anymore. In October of 2020, Moranis was the victim of a random assault on a New York City street, an unprovoked attack. He was knocked to the ground and had minor injuries. An arrest was later made. The story became immediate news, but not solely because of the crime itself. It made waves because the public hadn't seen him in so long. It was a sudden, jarring reminder. Rick Moranis is still here. He's still a part of our world. Rick Moranis wasn't pushed out of the industry or deemed irrelevant. He made a different choice, and he lived that choice with quiet dignity and no fanfare. But what is it about him that resonates so deeply? Why do people still wonder about him 31 years later? It goes beyond his work on screen. It has to do with his entire persona, and those are two very different things. When John Candy passed in '94, the public sorrow felt deeply personal. It wasn't that audiences mourned a celebrity, it felt as though they had lost a friend. Moranis evokes a similar feeling. His iconic characters, like Lewis, Tully, Seymour, and Nathan, never felt like conventional performances. They seemed like authentic extensions of a genuine human being, someone who truly believed in the role. In today's massively changed cultural landscape, where the gentle, the awkward, and the quietly sincere have often been overshadowed by the loud, the cynical, and the hyper-aware, that kind of authenticity feels more precious than ever. Thank you for taking the time to watch. If you enjoyed this kind of exploration, please consider liking, commenting, subscribing, or even all three. Your support makes a profound impact on this channel. And as always, I truly look forward to seeing you in the next video.